Welcome to Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. Our team's goal is to present science-based information about gardening and all things nature in New York's Hudson Valley. Hosts Jean and Tim, along with team members Teresa and Linda, are master gardener volunteers for New York's Columbia and Greene counties. So if you're interested in gardening or nature, or nuggets of information about what's happening outside your door, settle in. Enjoy the conversation. Whatever the season, we have something to say.
Hi, I'm Tim Kennelty.
And I'm Jean Thomas.
Welcome to Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. Today we're talking to Marc Wolf, the Executive Director of the Mountaintop Arboretum in Tannersville, New York. Welcome, Marc.
Good morning. Great to be here.
So, Marc, maybe you can tell us a little bit about the Mountaintop Arboretum, a little bit about history and why our listeners might want to come visit.
Sure. So the Mountaintop Arboretum was founded in 1977, so we've been around for quite a while. We've been under the radar for some of that time, but it was founded by two tree lovers, a couple, Bonnie and Pete Aarons, and they had a summer home overlooking this sort of scrubby 6 acres of property, and they both loved trees. And he was on the board at New York Botanical Garden. He was a research scientist, and they were fascinated at the elevation we were at 2,400 feet. What really is cold hardy there? You know, in the horticulture business, they say it's cold hardy to zone 4 or 5 or 6. So they bought this little scrubby land and they brought in topsoil and they started planting trees from all over the world. Trees that should have maybe not survived here, and they were really experimenting. So it wasn't a place to be beautiful. It was a place that was really for research, for the horticulture world, to see what really is hardy. So we have trees from Japan and China. A lot of them died. A lot of them did not do well. And a great reason to visit, I really see the Arboretum, because we are on the mountaintop. It's not difficult hiking. You know, the Catskills hiking is all up or all down, and it's rocky and it's roots. And this is really nice intermediate hiking. We have 3 miles of trails. We have gardens. You can get the hemlock forest experience, but we also have gardens too. So it's a nice mix. And for some people coming up from the city, or if you have guests that maybe don't want to hike up Sugarloaf or something like that, it's a nice place to visit for that. And we're open every day of the year, dawn to dusk, so any time of year, come visit.
So you get to see a lot of plant communities, and you don't have to exercise a lot. It sounds like my kind of place.
Yeah.
What zone actually are you in?
Well, technically the area is zone 5, but I really think we're sort of a 4 or 5 on that border.
Okay, now you've told us about the Arboretum. What about you, Marc? Tell us your background and how long you've actually been involved with this endeavor.
It's funny, when I started working here, I had a flashback from being a kid in my backyard in New Jersey, and I think I was 8 years old or around then, and I had a tree ID book, and I was IDing trees, so it's been in me for a while. And I went to college originally. I went to Williams College across the river. One of the main reasons I went there was because they had an environmental studies program, but I also got bit by the acting bug when I was in college and had a 30-year career living in New York City and working in theater mostly, and also some film and some television. And I sort of got rebit by the bug around 2008-ish and started studying at New York Botanical Garden and started working in garden design, and then decided I would go to New York Botanical Garden full-time. They have a school of professional horticulture. So I went there for 2 years and came out of there. And the Arboretum was actually looking at that time for a new executive director. And I had more, let's just say was more experienced than many of my classmates, because I'd had other careers. They were all in their 20s, whereas I was in my 50s. And so when the Arboretum came looking to the school for a new executive director, I had wanted to move back up here because my partner is a baker, and he's lived up here since 2002. So we really wanted to settle here, and we did in 2016 when I started at the Arboretum.
Serendipity.
I don't think I've ever heard of the combination of acting and gardening. Maybe is that a
What about
common-
baking?
Baking, well, baking
Yeah.
and gardening, and
Well, that's a really good question. And when I've done some webinars, we've talked about this. People know about my theater experience. And I do see when you come to public garden, the same way when you come to the theater, we are inviting you in to the space. I don't see landscape design as a painting. I see it as a immersive experience, a theatrical experience. You relate, you hear things, you feel the wind, you can feel the plants, you're walking through it. And for me, the Arboretum is really, there's an entrance, there are stories we tell along the way, and when you exit, hopefully you've changed, you've experienced something, you've grown closer to the people you arrived with, and maybe you met some people that you didn't know when you got there. So there's a shared public experience, and there are stories we tell. So I think there is theater and horticulture do come together.
that's very cool. I never thought of it that way.
My garden is slow-mo theater.
I think mine is crazy, unkempt theater.
Well, talk about slow-mo theater. A friend of mine gave me a quote, and I can never remember whose this should be attributed to, certainly not to me, but it is that landscape design is the slowest performing art. And Pete Odoff, who
Grass.
did the High Line, he says what he does is he puts plants on a stage and lets them perform. So there is a theatricality to it.
And it's always changing, too. That's
It's
the thing. You
always
go out the
changing.
next day, and it looks totally different, right?
And it's changing through time. Iconic landscape architect I work with named Daryl Morrison, who's really worked more in the Midwest, but he's done a lot of work at New York Botanical Garden, Brooklyn Botanic Garden in the East also. And he really talks a lot about change over years. And when he plants for it to keep changing on and on and on and on. It's not a static planting that he designs for.
Well, of course, nature does that too, right?
Of course,
with
yeah.
succession of forests and things like that, and you really can't tame it completely, right?
No, and it's funner for me not to try to, but to work with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of along those same lines, I am a native plant geek, and you're really focusing on natives to the Catskills now at the Arboretum, right?
Yes, definitely. So I told you, when the Arboretum first began, it was more about experimenting with trees from around the world. But over time, the Arboretum became more native plant focused as it has evolved. And now we are very native plant focused, and really that's why I'm here, is to really work with native plants, highlight the native plants of the Northeast, although with climate change, we're going to be highlighting plants of the Southeast also.
Yeah.
And we're also really interested in Catskill native species. So we have evolved, and we do have plant communities, like we have a bird cove where we have native shrubs that are great to plant for bird life, bird habitat and food and things like that.
So it's instructional, it's educational in terms of home gardeners coming and really kind of looking at what, if they want to attract birds, what kind of plants they may be planting.
Yeah, it's very much so instructional, but inspired by beauty first, and hopefully people want to then learn.
So where do you source your plants from? Is it one particular nursery, or how do you get your plants?
There's quite a few nurseries around that are very good. Catskill Native Nursery, everybody knows about down in Kerhonkson. And all these nurseries I'm going to visit, not only for the Arboretum, but for my own yard.
And we'll see you there probably because we're going to.
So Catskill Native is great. And, he actually wild collects some things, and that's not his main industry, but he does do that. He's formerly an entomologist, Francis. And Diana's there. And then Kearns Nursery in Jewett is a great nursery. But I do have to say, Bob Kearns is on our board of directors. Been around forever, Bob and Pat, and that's a great nursery, and he does sell a lot of native plants. And Greenbee Greenhouses in Cornwallville, Greenbee, Eli and Brianna, they were the contractors and purchased all the plants for the education center that I was talking about, for the rain gardens and the woodland edge. So they purchased all those for us, and then they planted them. And we helped them, but they didn't help us. We helped them.
They know what they're doing.
So they really do know what they're doing. Stories Nursery up in Freehold is a great nursery, and they've had a long relationship with the Arboretum. And then there are a couple of nurseries in Kingston, like Augustine's, and there's another one. But the ones that we really work most with are the ones I mentioned, including Stories. Yeah, I like all the people that run them. They're
Yeah.
really knowledgeable. They're really passionate, and it's such a great experience to go visit because I always learn when I go visit
Yeah.
these places.
Okay, you've got the Bird Cove. You also have wet meadows and woodland areas. How many different little sub-ecology sections are there?
There are many, a surprising number for 178 acres, but the Catskills, I guess, also has, because we're so mountainous, there's so many different little ecosystems. Some of them are created by the Arboretum, like around the new education center. It's an acre, it's on basically an acre site of the 178 acres, and we decided to use plants that are native only to the Catskills. So when you visit, we have so many different ecosystems. Some of them we created ourselves, like the rain gardens that are around the education center. We decided it would be only Catskill native species right on that 1 acre site around the education center. And at that, we have 6 different rain gardens ranging from very small, like home garden size, to a larger size. And they're all interconnected to retain water and slow water runoff, because that's very important here in the Catskills because we're connected to the New York City water system. So we're working actually on interpretive signage about all that. So we have rain gardens. We have rain gardens also out in the West Meadow. We have rain gardens near the Bird Cove, a huge rain garden that's very successful, just packed with native grasses and sedges and perennials like turtlehead and swamp milkweed, and then shrubs like winterberry and clethra. So that is just packed with great plants. And then we have, we call it the spiral garden. It's a beautiful, large spiral that you can run through or walk around, and that's not all native plants. There are some native plants in there, and that's almost like a pollinator garden because it's blooming throughout the year, and it very pollinator attractive perennials. So those are and then we have a hedgerow in the East Meadow. Instead of just planting boxwood or privet, we have a whole example of native dogwoods. It's not all native plants there, but native dogwoods, some native willows, some non-native willows, native roses, elderberry. So there's a whole bunch of shrubs there that you can use as a hedgerow. So those are like the designed gardens. But then we also have so many natural areas. We have a beautiful woodland walk where we are saving the ash trees as part of an experiment with Cornell University. We have the largest wetland that I know of at our elevation. It's a marsh about 14 acres that we call the Hidden Marsh because you get there by going through this incredibly beautiful, dark, shady hemlock spruce forest, and then all of a sudden there's a little tunnel of light and it opens out onto the Hidden Marsh, which is mostly a grass and sedges. And then within that hemlock spruce forest that we call Spruce Glen, we have the oldest carbon-dated bog in the Catskills. Mike Kudish has carbon-dated it back to 14,900 years ago. So and we have the whole record of the forest history for that length of time also. And there's a small boardwalk through that. That's really a beautiful, very primeval feeling area. It's all sphagnum moss and ferns, and it's all shaded by the hemlocks and spruce. It's quite beautiful. So we have these gardened areas, and we have really natural areas that are their own sort of garden rooms.
It is like theater. I mean, you describe it really well too. I mean, I can't believe I haven't been there. We must rush over there soon, right?
Yeah, let's just go now.
We're all nodding our heads that we
Yeah.
want to be there. I want to know, you talked about the ash trees. How are you saving the ash trees? Are you doing some kind of injections? What are you doing to save them?
Yeah, they're being inoculated on a 3-year cycle with a pesticide. And Cornell, Mark Whitmore at Cornell, who's working very hard right now on hemlock and hemlock woolly adelgid, but he has been doing this ash study with us for 6 or 7 years now. And you can walk through and look for yourself at how successful it is. The trees are marked off with ribbons. Each year's cycle of injections has a different ribbon color, and that's explained in signage also.
That's amazing.
I miss my ash trees.
Yeah, I mean, and they're
Yeah.
so important in the ecosystem. So you're going to see things that we're not. I mean, I'm losing lots of ash trees that we're not seeing probably in terms of Lepidoptera and other species. You're going to be seeing all these things that we don't see. because you have the ash trees.
Yeah, very much so. Now, I don't remember what is specific to ash, but we did a natural resources inventory back in 2018. And for instance, the beech, I think it's a beautiful little blue butterfly called the early hair streak, and that is dependent on beech. And beech are suffering their own, I mean, we can get to a litany about tree problems right now, but beech is suffering from, there's a beech bark disease. And they almost, to me, it's so sad, they almost to me look like they have leprosy, the way that beautiful, smooth beech bark starts to get kind of warty. There's another beech leaf disease that's on its way. But in the Woodland Walk, we have a beech grove that we call the beech circle that seems to be resistant. Knock on wood. I don't
right
see
here.
wood. Yeah, there we go. Knock on wood.
There's no
on
wood
our
in
heads.
this room.
Except for our heads. And it's a beautiful grove, and there are all these baby beeches all around it because you know how they sucker, and then the way we've sort of created is you sort of enter this beech room, and I think they're proving to be resistant so far, this one little grove.
That's good.
Yeah. So I have one other question for you. You were talking about a new planting around the education center that's specific to the Catskills. What kind of plants are really specific to the Catskills that I couldn't plant maybe in my garden across the river?
They're not specific to the Catskills. They're native to the Catskills. Okay. So I wouldn't say, specific, the word is endemic, meaning they only exist here. Right. I don't even know. Somebody should call in and let us know. Is there a plant that's endemic, meaning only existing in the Catskills? But the plants around the education center are all native to the Catskills. And it's important for us to plant those. When I plant now, what I think of is the beauty is not just in what the flower looks like or what the foliage looks like. The beauty for me is how the insects respond to it, what's coming to attract to it, what sounds am I hearing from the bugs around, what kind of life am I seeing? To me, that's beauty, and that's what we're trying to inspire people how to garden. So Jamie Purinton, who is the landscape architect, and I put together a list, culling from lists from Catskill Native Nursery, from Mike Kudish, from Hudsonia, other sources, because there's not a fully comprehensive list of the Catskill flora. I think Brooks, I said this at a webinar I did a while ago in Summit Row. Actually, Brooks did a 4-volume series, and he did, but I'm not sure if it's totally comprehensive. But people have been threatening to do a comprehensive flora of the Catskills, but it isn't published yet. But we pulled all these sources together and decided what plants would work well for us. We have a representative of the woodland edge plantings. We have the bald outcrop, the rocky outcrop ledges that we have, and then we have the rain garden. So those 3 plant communities, plant habitats are represented just around the education center.
I remember listening to you on a webinar just a couple of months ago, I think, and you were talking about some kind of alder that I became fascinated with, I think, right, that you talked about that was maybe not specific to the Catskills, but that you had planted, and it likes wet, and it looks very cool, I think.
Speckled alder. It grows on the hummocks in the hidden marsh, and it's not a plant that you're going to find quite often in the landscape industry.
So Lowe's wouldn't have it.
Lowe's will not have it. But Jamie and I both really love it. One thing we designed for is the winter, because our winters are so long and so cold, and anything that shows any kind of life, say in February, March, is a great thing to me. So at that time of year, the male flowers that come out in catkins, there's sort of like chains of tiny, tiny flowers, and they start coming out, I'd say, late February, March. And they get to be about 2 or 3 inches long, and the shrub is draped with them. And when it's blowing in the breeze, it's like curtains blowing. And then the female fruits persist through the winter, so you have that. And then I think the foliage and the structure is very beautiful too. But again, not a plant you're going to find, but it's a plant that I don't know what insects, for instance, go to it, but I'm sure it's very important for local fauna.
I want some of that.
Yeah.
I got a swamp.
Oh, it'd be perfect for it.
Yeah. Okay, now, talking about all the trees that we're all worried about and that are so gorgeous, let's talk about the center. The education center is constructed of local wood from the Arboretum?
Yes.
Is that renewable stuff?
It's renewable because it was growing in the forest, and we harvested it. Yeah, in 2000. This was one of my first great jobs when I arrived at the Arboretum in the winter of 2016 to 17. I went around our forest with the timber frame architect and the miller who's gonna cut the pieces to go into the timber frame. Cuts basically the jigsaw puzzle, and the contractor and an arborist from our board of directors named Vern Rist and a couple other people. We walked around our forest and we picked what trees were going to be represented, and we ended up we wanted to represent as many species as possible because this timber framing is a 7,000-year-old craft, and humans have worked with trees throughout humanity to build these structures, and we wanted to represent as many of the species as possible, even if it's not a great structural tree. We use, for instance, striped maple, musclewood, hop hornbeam. These are smaller trees, but we love the way the timber shows off and how it contrasts with the others. And we ended up using 21 different species. And when you walk in the building, you feel like we left the structure, we left the branching. And it was fun walking around, and we would bargain with them. The architect would say, this tree is perfect for this design element. And Vern, who's on the board, and I would say, well, we really love that tree. And I'd say, well, we'll leave this tree, but give us that red oak over there. Okay, you can have the red oak. And then
I'll take his brother.
when we were all done, Vern and I went back on a couple of trees. We just wrote, on the tape, because they'd all been taped, do not take this tree, please. We changed our mind. And I once got a question like, do you get pushback that you cut down trees? We cut down so few trees, but we also have to, we've used trees forever. Humans have used trees, and we've abused trees, but we've also, some humans have co-evolved and lived well with trees and managed the forest well. And I think we can use trees, and we can manage the forest well and make use of them too.
And it can help a forest too if you're doing some cutting. If you are regenerating, it can help. So.
Mm-hmm. And we celebrate these trees and their beauty. We want to bring people's appreciation of the trees. And then, I'm sure we're going to get to this in a question, but we one of the things we wanted to do was you see these trees inside the building, and then we want to see them out in the field too, out in the forest. So we've just developed a native tree trail that winds through all the sections of the Arboretum, and it features the 21 species that are represented in the Arboretum, but we have a total of 33 species on the trail because a lot of the species we couldn't use because they were too small or we didn't have enough of them. And some trees that are native to the Catskills don't grow specifically at the Arboretum. For instance, white oak. We're just too high in elevation. We have zero white oak in the natural forest. So over time, we've planted some at the Arboretum, and so that's, for instance, is on the native tree trail.
So 21 trees, that rings a bell.
Yeah, we have a beautiful book called 21 Trees, and there's a chapter on each tree, and the photography is by Rob Cardillo, who's really one of the foremost garden photographers in the country. And so the book is beautiful, and he does really close-up photos of the fruit and flowers, some of which I never even had noticed these specifics, and then the larger pictures of the trees and the landscape. And also because Mike Kudish has done the coring, we know so much about the forest history. So he's written a chapter on the forest history of the Catskills and specifically the Arboretum. And Bob and Joanna Titus have written on the geology, and there's a little chapter by the architect and by the landscape architect. So it's kind of like a coffee book. And Larry McCaffrey, who is a former board chair, wrote about each tree. And in the introduction, he says, flip through this book. It will remind you of your time here and maybe when you want to come back. And also the geologic history in there. You see that you're there for such a brief moment in time. And there's something, for me, nice about that take advantage of this brief moment in time that you're here. But anyway, it is a beautiful book, and we're very proud of it, and the building also.
Tim, I'll let you read my book when I'm finished.
I know. Jean just told me before you came in that she ordered it, and it's coming today.
Today.
So,
wow.
Yeah, there you go.
Not yesterday.
Timely.
Today.
Timely.
Yeah. Okay, now, you must have educational events and things going on all year. In an average year, do you have a regular annual succession of events?
We always mix it up. Last year, Philippe Petit, who is the great aerialist who tightrope walked between the World Trade Centers and has done other amazing feats, he did a knot tying workshop for us. So, we do some kind of really fun things. We always have a fairy garden program because we have a fairy garden in the Woodland Walk, and we always do that. We always do our annual bird walk. Almost every year, we do a mushroom walk, and then we have other programs that we filter in that come and go. But we usually have about 20 to 25 programs a year.
And you have a special event coming up Labor Day weekend,
We
right?
do, Labor Day weekend. So another program we do every year, we do an author talk. Every year, Margaret Roach has spoken for us. Victoria Johnson, who wrote a great book called American Eden about the first botanical garden in the United States, she spoke. But this year coming up, I'm really excited. There's another great botanical garden they're in the foothills of the Catskills. They're in Stone Ridge. It's called Hortus, and it's Allison Levy and Scott Serrano. And I love visiting their garden too. And they've just come out with a book called Cold Hardy Fruits and Nut. A lot of them are native, which really excited me. So, there's hazelnut in there. Also, all the berries are in there, and I love blackberries, the raspberry, odoratum, I forget what.
The flowering raspberry.
Yeah,
That's one of my favorite
I think
plants.
that's in there.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful plant. And they grow all these things. So this is not go out and try this. This is what we've tried. This is what didn't work. This is what did work. It's very clear about how to grow these. So I got an advance copy and I read it and really loved it and asked them if they would be our author talk speakers this year.
Great.
We always do the author talk. It's Sunday of Labor Day weekend, and it's always at 5 p.m.
Okay, we talked about bird watching, but there's a weather station going on too?
We have a little weather station, yes, and we do record the weather. The Aarons the founders were recording the weather in the 70s. So at some point we're going to have to find a grad student who wants to really study weather because we really have now 40 years of weather recordings. I don't know how they used to do it, but now we have a little weather station with an odometer. Is it called an odometer? It measures the wind speed.
Yeah, the odometer's in my
sounds
car.
like my
The
car,
odometer's
yeah.
in the car. Saw something else.
It's a something-ometer,
It's some
I think.
kind of ometer. And we measure rainfall, temperature. And if you go to our website, we actually do, if you want to check out the weather, there is a little link and it will tell you, what the rainfall is and what the temperature is and what the high and low has been so far for the day. And if you really are lazy and you really want to see if there's too much snow or something like that, we have a webcam. And
that's
you can
better.
turn on the
Yeah.
webcam and see if it's raining or see if it's snowing. Or
Man, I'm a weather geek and a native plant geek. I'm like felling over here,
you have to
You're
be a
Paul-
weather.
Yeah, you have to be a weather
around
geek.
here, yeah.
You really do,
If you're
especially
planting.
lately.
Well, it's just trying to even figure out how to deer spray, which is just an organic thing that we use to keep the deer from eating everything. It can't be too windy. It can't be too sunny. It can't be too hot. It
Can't be about to
rain.
rain.
Can't become. There was one summer where there was always a thundercloud coming over, and I can't do it, and then I just see it pass away, and it happened like 6 weeks in a row.
It's like staining your deck if there's no right time.
There's no
right
right time.
So I always ask this question about what can a home gardener learn from coming to the Arboretum? And I don't know if you agree with this. I always say that individual gardeners can make a difference and cumulatively can make a difference. I mean, do you agree with that?
I definitely agree with that. People are quoting Doug Tallamy a lot now.
Yeah, that's his. It's not my
Bringing
phrase,
nature
but
home.
yeah.
But yeah, I think you add everybody's backyard together, and I've heard people argue about that, but my feeling is yes, we should be planting for our ecosystem. And what you can learn at the Arboretum is how to have a beautiful garden and use the plants that are native to either the Catskills or the Northeast. I don't like to call them demonstration gardens because I like to inspire with beauty first, because I find wherever I go, I find what's growing there naturally, what works with the rock, what works with the climate. I find that beautiful. Like when I went to Mexico, I went to a native plant garden in Oaxaca, and that's one of the most beautiful gardens I've ever been to because it was native to there, you know, a lot of cactus and things like that. But what you can find here is how to garden that will help the ecosystem here, help create habitats for animals. You know, there may be a change in what you think is beautiful. For instance, if a tree falls down in a woodland, we usually leave it. We may make a bench out of it and let it start to decompose, but we leave standing snags of trees, and we have signage about that because something else I learned with Darryl Morrison was when you walk around the forest, there's not trees only standing up. There's also a lot of trees lying down. There's a horizontal element, and there's beauty in the horizontal also. So you may... I mean, what you said, you would learn to see what plants work well with each other, and there may be a different sense of what's beautiful. It's not the tamed, mulched yard. It may be plants that are growing together and either fighting it out or working well with each other.
So makes me want to come and visit, and we will be visiting soon. And I hope everybody who's listening will come and visit as well.
And let me just plug another way to learn. Ryan Moore is our horticulturist, and he is really developing a really nice team of volunteers. And we really depend on our volunteers too. And there, if you really want to learn, come garden with Ryan. And I'm going to be working with him a little bit too this year. So we have volunteers that help us send out mailings or help us check in people at the education programs. It's a really nice community of people. So if you're interested in volunteering, please contact us. info@mtarboretum.org or through the website.
Sounds good to me. Mark, we want to thank you for joining us today to tell us all about the Arboretum. I know that Tim is now chomping at the bit.
I'm almost in my car.
Yeah, and I may join him. I'm not going to let him drive, though, because he'll speed. And thanks to all our listeners. Until next time.
Thank you. It's been great to talk to you.
That concludes another episode of Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. We would like to thank Sandra Linnell and Devin Connolly from Cornell Cooperative Extension of Columbia and Greene Counties for production support. And a special thank you to our listeners for joining us on this episode of Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. You can find links to any of the topics mentioned in this episode at our website at ccecolumbiagreen.org. Comments and suggestions for future topics may be directed to us at columbiagreenmgb@cornell.edu or on the CCE Master Gardener Volunteers of Columbia and Greene Counties Facebook page. For more information about Cornell Cooperative Extension of Columbia and Greene Counties, visit our website at ccecolumbiagreen.org or visit us in Hudson or in Acre. Cornell Cooperative Extension provides equal programming and employment opportunities